Thank you for joining me this afternoon. This is Brian with Redefined-Life. First, I want to thank all my subscribers and those of you that have liked the videos and that have subscribed to the channel and that continue to share these videos. As Christians, we can all agree, or we should agree, that there is an unseen world out there, that there are angels and demons, that Jesus Christ is going to come back and battle Satan, and he will set this world right. But Satan has been there for a long time, and he has been working against God. We can look back, for example, at the Egyptian culture and all of the false gods that they worshipped at that time. And we also can see that a lot of those deities that they worshipped are in our culture today. I have heard Christians say things like, how did we get here? How is this mindset that's going around come so quickly and take such a hold? How did this LGBTQ become so pervasive in the culture that we are, and how much support it is gained? And if we look back through history, we can see that Satan has been very busy. He's put the idea that man doesn't need God. He's put the idea that man is his own God. He has given man and culture false gods to worship. Sometimes I think Christians have either forgotten, or they maybe have never learned or been told about some of this history. Obviously, the media puts a narrative out there that they want you to believe, and history is basically the winner gets to write the history book. If we look in today's culture, we can see occult symbolism in a lot of things. I believe that there's satanic forces out there that is moving pieces around as we speak against the Christians and basically against God. And things like Hollywood and some of their messages that they put out. And we're going to look at something today that's a very prominent thing. It's very well documented out there. And that's going to be the history of JPL. And that's the Jet Propulsion Labs. We're not going to get into NASA and the conspiracy theories behind all this. There's tons of those as well. But the history of JPL is very well documented. There's tons of resources out there. I will document all of my resources. And I have picked multiple resources so that way you can kind of see that there are a lot of resources out there. So a question would be, is if you started a company, would you want your values to be demonstrated through that company? So for instance, being a Christian, if you started a Christian business, that you would have your Christian influences within your business. Would you have good operating principles? Would you treat your employees right? There's tons of things and values that, as a Christian, I would think that we would want our company to demonstrate, to show that, this company lives by biblical principles. And if you said yes to that, then would it be equal to say that if a person that didn't believe in God, they believed in a different deity, they had a whole set of different principles that they live by, that those principles that they live by would not influence the people that they are around and the business practices that they allow to happen? So today we're going to look at the Jet Propulsion Labs, and that's referred to as JPL, and we're not going to get into anything other than the history and their occult ties. One reason of doing this is to basically look at an occult. We'll see how it affects the people in the occult, what they will do for their beliefs, and the extremes that they will go to fulfill those beliefs. And second, I hope that people will see this and they will open their eyes and realize that the occult is still out there, and it is affecting a lot of different things in our society, and it's driving a lot of this mentality that you're seeing today. As a warning before we get started, there's a lot of graphic nature in the things that they have done within this occult, and we're going to discuss them because I think it makes an impact not to sugarcoat it. as Christians, I see sometimes people sugarcoating sin. Instead of saying that that's wrong, they make it seem like it's less than wrong. And I want to be true to what they believed and what happened. So that way you get an authentic feel of what the extreme was in the occult. So as we're going through this, I want people to keep in mind of some of the issues that are in the news today. They're things that the church is dealing with and how our culture is viewing things. And as we look at this particular instance of this occult and try to make a parallel between what happened here is happening today and how the influence of this could have possibly carried over to the influences of today. And as I said, I will document all these resources and links in the description. And I want to give credit to Wikipedia. Now, this is a very well covered topic. And since there's so many different resources, I tried to pull from different ones just to give you guys an essence of the different publications on it. But there's plenty of things to verify these sources, but we're going to start with Wikipedia. And what I've done is I've actually copied out the pertinent stuff in here just to make it a little bit more readable and focused. And again, though, I want to give all the credit to Wikipedia and all the authors that's contributed to that, all the credit that they deserve. So this Aleister Crowley, now he was the founder of this religion called Thelema, and which is an occult. And as we get going, the things that they believed and the things that they did will blow your mind. If you've never heard of this, and that's why I gave the warning before that some of this stuff is going to be pretty vile. And again, I don't want to sugarcoat any of this because I want it to hit home of how bad this stuff is. And when we look at the occult today and the influences of the occult, they're just as bad. So he founded this religion, Thelema, and he identified himself as a prophet entrusted with the guiding humanity into the Aeon of Horus in the early 20th century. So, as we unpack this a little bit here, identifying himself as a prophet. Now, if we look today, we can definitely see different religious cults that have people that identify as prophets. I think you can go on YouTube probably and search for modern day prophets, and you'll probably get a lot of different hits on it. So, this is something that is prevalent today. So, Crowley gained widespread notoriety during his lifetime, being a drug user, bisexual, and an individualist social critic. Okay, so a drug user, we see drugs today. A bisexual, this is back then, and we're going to see where this plays into a lot more, but this factors into a lot we're seeing with this LGBTQ mentality that's going on. So this bisexualism has been there for a long time, and this guy was an individualist social critic. Now, when you get influential people, and we see this with movie stars and artists and famous sports people, they want to go out there and they want to say an opinion on something like it really matters what their opinion is. But they have such a following that if so-and-so that's got a voice in the world that would say something, that their followers will just believe it. And that's a very scary thing when we take things at face value that were being said. For instance, in the news, if you watch an article, and this stuff happens all the time, and it's infuriating, that the media will run a story that has elements in it that's false. Later on, as say if it's a developing story or it's an attack on somebody, and later on that they find that that information isn't true, they'll go back and correct some of it, or they'll put the correction in a spot where maybe it's at the end of an article or it's at the end of a news presentation, and a lot of the viewers have already dropped off. So the people that already had seen the original news article, for instance, have already got it in their head that that statement was true. And we can see this with the election things that's going on, statements that were made that were clearly debunked by the left or the right, not going to get political. And yet those same statements are being used by politicians against another politician that has been completely debunked. Yet they say those things and it resonates that that is truth, and that's from the people that have never been really told the truth, or they've never been told the full story that has already been debunked by their side of the left or the right. These movie stars and socialites out there that have an influence, it's equally frustrating with me for them, because it seems like if they have an opinion, everybody that follows them are going to blindly follow their opinion and their advice. And that's a very dangerous thing. And we're seeing it all over this society today. So Crowley has remained a highly influential figure over the Western esotericanism and the counterculture of the 1960s, and he continues to be considered a prophet of Thelema. He became increasingly skeptical of Christianity, pointing out biblical inconsistencies to his religious teachers, and he went against the Christian morality of his upbringing by smoking, masturbating, and having sex with prostitutes from whom he contracted gonorrhea. Now, as a Christian, there are consequences for our actions. Here he was having sex with prostitutes and he got a sexually transmitted disease. We look at how it seems like the biblical model of marriage is being disregarded now, that people can sleep with anybody and it's perfectly okay. And then we're seeing things like abortion come up. So abortion, which is killing babies, but the ultimate problem of abortion is people want to have sex. And they want to have sex with no consequences, which is the baby that's created. So if you would follow the biblical model of marriage and waiting to have sex before you get married, then this abortion issue becomes less likely. Now, I'm not getting into those cases of where it was forced on them. There's a lot of cases that we can argue with that. But I'm just saying, for this promiscuous culture that's out there of disregarding the biblical model of marriage. But there are consequences of this, and as you can see, he contacted gonorrhea here. So Crowley had his, let me pull this up so we don't get too far down, and you might have missed a little bit of that, so I'm going to pull it up here so you guys can read that. The way the screen capture works is just a little tricky for me, but we'll figure it out as we go. So Crowley had his first significant mystical experience while he was on holiday in Stockholm. Several bibliographers, including this Lawrence Salton, Richard Kaskatsky, and Tobias Churton, believe that this was the result of Crowley's first same-sex sexual experience, which enabled him to recognize his bisexuality. So here again, we are seeing this bisexualism and stuff that's prevalent into this culture. And here, which I'm tying back to the occult, this experience of bisexuality still has its impact way back then, which is carrying over its impact in today's society. So here he's pretending to be a prince. So this was basically, he had a wife and he was pretending to be this prince and princess, and they rented this apartment in which Crowley set up a temple room and began invoking ancient Egyptian deities while studying Islamic mysticism in Arabic. So we're looking at this. He's pretending, which he's lying. He's lying to do something that he needed to accomplish. And again, from a biblical standpoint, we see this all the time. People aren't honest with each other. It's really hard to trust people. It's really hard to find somebody that's authentic. And it seems like that is getting more and more prevalent in this society as we go on. But he set up a temple room. So, as Christians, we might have a prayer room. So, and that's a good thing really for a Christian to have a place that they can go back and spend time with the Lord. But he set this temple room up and he invoked ancient Egyptian deities. Now, I mentioned earlier that, these Egyptian deities, we see these all around. And that might be a whole nother thing to talk about, but we still see this today. And he wrote this homoerotic work called The Scented Garden. And then in November of 1907, Crowley and Jones, this was another person that we don't need to discuss, at this time decided to follow an occult order to act as a successor to the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn. So, following a mountaintop sex magic ritual, Crowley also performed an invocation to a demon called, however you say it, Corazon, involving a blood sacrifice. So, sex and magic have always went hand in hand. It had something to do with the emotion that was derived by sex, and then the magic ritual. It fueled the incantation or whatever they did. But they did this to try to invoke a demon. Yeah, what would you do with a demon once you invoked one? But he tried. So in the city, he continued experimenting with sex magic, and this was through the use of masturbation, female prostitutes, and male clients of the Turkish bathhouse. So, and these were documented in his diaries. So as we can see, there's the bisexualism again, female prostitutes and male clients. Crowley performed sex magic in April of 1916. He was a heavy drug user, and he undertook a ritual after he proclaimed himself Master Theron. And then here we are, seeing again how man wants to be their own master and their own God over the Lord Jesus Christ. Crowley also lambasted Hitler as a black magician. He associated with a variety of figures in Britain's intelligent community. So we're tying the occult into its influence in today's culture and society. And I pointed this out because here he was with the Britain's intelligence community. And when you're around people of influence, your things that you say, your beliefs will actually influence other people. Now, as Christians, we have to be very careful on what we say and what we do because, you might be at the store and all of a sudden get mad and start cussing up a storm at something, but maybe an unbeliever sees that and they go, wow, that's a Christian. You might even, another Christian see you and go, wow, he's a Christian. We lose our influence and good standing in the public's eye, might be a way to put it. But our influence is very important. And then here on December of 1947, Crowley dies. So I found some other information. This is still from Wikipedia, and we'll change sources here in a bit. But this was about his belief system, just kind of a summary of it. And that was this religion that he created, Thelema. And it has been described by scholars as a religion, and specifically as both a new religious movement and a magico-religious doctrine. Sexuality played an important role in Crowley's ideas about magic. Now, he did spell it this way. It was his own way of spelling it, and his practice of it. And he has been described as being central to Thelema. He outlined 3 forms of sex magic: the autoerotic, the homosexual, and the heterosexual. So again, this whole occult, we had these homosexual tendencies, and it was a part of the occult. And he argued that such acts could be used to focus the magician's will onto a specific goal, such as financial gain or perceived creative success. For Crowley, sex was treated as a sacrament, and the consumption of sexual fluids interpreted as a Eucharist. That was also manifested as the cakes of light. And you can read right here what that consisted of. So when we look at some of this stuff in here, and there he had stated here how sex was used to focus what the person wanted. So next we're going to look at Thelema, and this is another Wikipedia article. So give credit for them as well. And I kind of done the same thing, pulled a few things out that I wanted to note about it. And it was just, they called it was Western esoteric and an occult social or spiritual philosophy. New religious movement founded in the early 1900s by Aleister Crowley. And he was an English writer, mystic, occultist, ceremonial magician. And this kind of also shows, being a writer and you do have influence. So how far does that influence spread, and how much of your beliefs does that spread upon to others and influence others? And as a religion, I mean, they believe this, wouldn't you want to promote your religion? I mean, so it's not like you had this personal belief that you kept it all to yourself and practiced in your basement or something. But, if you truly believed in what you were doing, I would think that, you would try to get people to join your cause. And then central to Thelema is this concept of discovering and following one's true will. As Christians, God's given us the Bible. He's given us direction for our lives. So, having a religion where you have to discover your one's true will, it's again, it's just not a biblical belief. So now that we've talked about him, we're going to go into another person, and this is all going to sequentially, in a sense, tie together to get where we want at the end. So this next resource was just encyclopedia.com, and this is Jack Parsons. So we're going to look here, and he was an explosives expert. He pioneered in rocket propulsion, and he was a follower of, guess who? Aleister Crowley. And then in 1939, he discovered a book by Crowley and then met this Winifred Smith, who also led what was then the only active chapter of Crowley's organization, the Ordo Templi Orientalis, then in existence, so however you say that. In the months immediately following here, World War II, Parsons began a set of independent magical operations that would become known as the Babylon workings. And I'm going to pull that up here because I want you to see the Ranker article, and I believe it's this one right here. And this is Ranker, and this is I'll pull the picture up here that you can kind of see. But this talks about what this Babylon workings consisted of. And this, pull this up here so we can see, which sought to conceive a child of the astral plane whom would eventually usher in the goddess Babylon. And Parsons attempted to usher in this astral child into the world. The two of them, now L. Ron Hubbard here was involved in this, but we're going to stick to Parsons here. But the two of them engaged in a ritual, chanting, drawing occult symbols in the air with swords, dripping animal blood on ruins, and pleasing themselves in order to impregnate a magical tablets. Now, we still see this occult symbolism in today's society. So we're going to go up to the grunge, and we're going to pull an article out here just to kind of keep things going. And the big thing here is he considered Aleister Crowley a father. So Parsons, we're going to see that, he worshiped this person. He considered him a father, that, this was a person that gave him the influence, of his life. Parsons channeled a document called Liber 49, which he came to believe was the fourth chapter of Crowley's basic magic text, the Book of Law. So he believed that he was able to find this fourth chapter in Crowley's magic text, trying to carry on what Aleister Crowley was already doing. So this was a continuation, in a sense, of what was already being done. And here's an article from the Telegraph. This is another popular thing, but they ran a story on this, and I'm going to tie all this stuff together. So they titled this Sex, Rocket Science, and Satanism Meet the NASA's Real Hidden Figures. So if we come down here, and there we go. And you can see here that Jack Parsons, 1930, he was labeled here in this article. And this was the three. We're gonna talk about this here later on too. But just as to show you, and then also this name right here, Frank Malina. So we got Parsons and Malina, and we're gonna tie those two names to keep this continuity going. So this is from the Science History Institute Museum and Library, and the Disappearing Spoon podcast. So they ran a story from this podcast on Parsons and some of the information regarding that. So, keep in mind that these are the people that have laid the groundwork for JPL. But we're going to go over to some notes on this that I took. So Parsons here, he was very good at making things go boom. And they had a lot of accidents. He did a lot of experiments that exploded and destroyed things that shouldn't have been destroyed. On one of his test sites later on, there was a major accident where somebody about got decapitated from the explosion, which led to them getting expelled from Caltech, and they had their own new place of doing their experiments and stuff. But Parsons had a darker hobbies too, like the occult. And then at age 12, he tried summoning a demon in his bedroom. For some reason, he was convinced that it worked. Again, fill in the blanks there. When socializing after the lecture, Parsons and Foreman met some people who eventually introduced him to Frank Molina, a Caltech student writing a PhD thesis on rocketry. So in that picture we seen in there that, Frank Molina was there, and that was a later article that this is before then, but they got introduced here, and this is where Caltech comes in. So in 1937, their liquid engines were producing massive amounts of thrust. As a result, the facility members at Caltech offered them a science lab on campus. It was their big break. So, in all fairness, Parsons, he was a very intelligent person. He's a pioneer. He's, what they discovered back then is really where NASA and SpaceX and, how we're getting things, out of our atmosphere into space. That was a very, very pioneered thing that they did. So when they moved to this space here on campus at Caltech, they decided to try on this new outfit, the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, the famous JPL of NASA. That's what it's called today. And it goes on here. It says, unfortunately, the JPL trio quickly wore out their welcome at Caltech. Their work was pretty noisy and their engines revving day and night, and along with some of the accidents that happened, but they were banished here from campus, and they set up a shop instead in a canyon in western Pasadena. And again, to be fair, Parsons had plenty of brilliant ideas. People became joking that JPL really stood for the Jack Parsons Lab. He was that important. So, this guy was very influential. He knew what he was doing. He had great ideas. They were experimenting and they were making leaps and bounds with it. So Jack Parsons says eventually he had sworn off summoning demons. So he was getting some flack a little bit from people around him. Obviously, I would think if you're working with a coworker or a boss, and all of a sudden he's talking about demons all the time in the occult, that you probably get some flack from it. So he basically swore off summoning demons, but he never quit giving up the fascination of the occult. In fact, that obsession was about to take over his life. Now, from a biblical standpoint, let's talk about obsessions just for a second. And we'll equate that into sins. It's really easy to let sin consume us. And to the point that it affects everything that we do. And the longer that we allow that sin to have that foothold in our life, the harder it is to get out of that. And if we allow those things to go too far, too long, it can definitely destroy your life. And, we just need to be careful that, we are aware of those sins in our lives. We're working to, stop those sins. And, whether it's through accountability through other Christians, whether it's, constant prayer to God that, you need help and He's the only one that can help you. Whatever we do, we just need to be aware that that obsession can become very real and overcoming in our lives. And it goes on here that Parsons read about the occult. And as you can see here, he was enamored by Aleister Crowley, and they deemed him here in this article as a British Satanist, a man who once declared himself to be the so-called Great Beast 666. He was fascinated, this isn't in here, but I had read in other places that he was very fascinated about Revelations and the beast of Revelations, and he uses this in his, belief system in the occult. And it just kind of shows you that sometimes these occults have Christian elements. You'll see also in today's society where people will misquote scripture, they will cherry pick scripture, and then they will use that to defend their position and have an argument that, see, the Bible says this. This is why it's very important for Christians to know scripture. They need to know their theology and their doctrine. They need to know when things are said or taken out of context. They need to know what the meaning is and how to apply it to their Christian beliefs. In 1939, Parsons and his wife Helen attended a so-called Gnostic Mass, and this was a rite that was part of Thelema, which Crowley invented in the 1900s, and this drew on practices of the ancient Egyptians to pagan rites to the Freemasons. Two central aspects were magic and sex rituals, and we had talked about that before. And magic doesn't mean stage illusions. It was more like a paranormal experience, interacting with spirits, talking to the dead. Goes on here, it says, meanwhile, sex rituals are exactly what they sounded like. In Crowley's religion, sex was considered a sacrament. And during the Gnostic masses, worshippers ate so-called cakes of light, and we discussed what that was. And they were basically Eucharists made of flour, honey, oil, ash, and often bodily fluids. And you can read right there of what they was it consumed with. So you should have a good, or at least a better understanding of what this occult consisted of and their, demented practices that they had. And, this was with the people that, founded JPL. Now, as I asked earlier, do you think that the principles and the mindset of your founders of something, does that carry on with the company's principles? Is that foundation laid and does it continue on? Or maybe you might believe that, well, something could be founded on people that started it like that, and maybe today that those influences aren't there. I'm going to leave that up to you to decide. But we got to look at least the occult side of things and how it affected the people that were involved in it. Because these occults are still there today. At some levels, their influences are astounding when you start looking at it. The last thing I want to do is just to go over here to tie everything together. So we've looked at the founder of Thelema, Crowley. We looked at Parsons, which he was considered Crowley a father. Was an innovator with the jet propulsion. He was part of him and Melina that were part of the basis, the starters of JPL. And then when we go up here to tie it all together, we're going to stop at NASA, but here's the NASA website. And then you can go down to check out the Jet Propulsion Lab archives. And then let's click right over here. And just as a little bit to tie it all together, here's a memoir from Frank Melina. And again, this is very well documented. And I just hope that people will see this, and maybe that have not been exposed to this can actually see an occult and what they've done. And what's even more scary is that there was a company built on these people. And you will see occult symbolism. You will see things with Egyptian, for instance, naming on that. You'll see company logos that have, artwork or symbols in them. And it's not a conspiracy. You can trace those origin backs to, pagans and the occult. And as Christians, it's good to know these things and be aware of what we're really dealing with out there. If you haven't liked this video, please like the video. And if you haven't subscribed to the channel, please do that. I want to thank the subscriber that's in another country. I guess that makes us international. So I appreciate your support. Keep sharing the videos. It just helps us get out and reach more people.